Hikikomori. A hikikomori is the abnormal avoidance of social contact, typically by adolescent males. It is a person who avoids social contact and will withdraw into themselves. So what makes a hikikomori? What is the formula that will manufacture an individual to completely shut themselves within themselves? What will make them completely and utterly feel out of place with everything that they could be a part of, to the point where they don't even exist, that they're just stuck in their room in their own little universe outside of the real universe? Can you be outside of the universe yet within the universe? Tesseract? I don't know. Anyway, yeah. What will make them completely and utterly feel out of... I already read that. If one is stuck complacent within their own misery without speaking up, they will begin to normalize their negative belief patterns, which essentially means if you feel a certain way for long enough, that certain way is now your reality. It doesn't matter what reality is. The way you feel dictates the way you experience the world, all right? Anybody who's had depression can understand that what that means. You don't know any other reality because you've been stuck in this pseudo bubble for so long. Your ability to see outside of it has almost been permanently distorted. No one knows what causes a hikikomori to be a hikikomori, but since over 1 million people in Japan and many more across the world are seemingly taking part in this self-enforced isolation, there has to be some commonality. And I think it's avoidant personality disorder, which by definition is a mental condition characterized by feelings of inadequacy, extreme shyness, sensitivity to rejection, coupled with an inferiority complex. And as children, these people tend to avoid like their parents and won't seek much comfort or contact from like other people, like physically or emotionally. They kind of like withdraw and like stay to themselves. And as they get older, they tend to develop intimacy problems and like invest little in social or romantic relationships and be unwilling to share thoughts and feelings with others. And if one is hikikomori, I would guess that they most likely develop a higher level of separation anxiety than the average child in the first couple years of their life. Maybe a parent treated them like an object, or like say a comfort item for themselves, or a showpiece in their infancy, and the child just adapted around this role early on in their lives. And this framework kind of set them up for a lifelong compounding of emotional issues that would force them to like lock themselves away mentally and physically. Like, they may have been the well-behaved child whose parents' friends would always comment on how well like they've done. Like, oh, you've done such a great job raising them. They're so well-behaved. And the kid just like sits there. And it's because like, and they're so surprised, like, because the kid doesn't act out. The kid never acts like a child. And this it reinforces a perfectionist quality within the kid. So for external familial feedback, it is conditioning the child to assume this false identity of themselves. Like, they never really get to be a kid. They're always sitting there because they know they get praised for never doing anything that I guess they would want to do as children. I'm not a fucking psychologist, so don't say, oh, he said, I don't know shit. All right, I'm just saying what I think on this. So like, yeah, so like the reverse is also subject. Say a child does something small as like having their hands in their pockets, all right, while they're in front of like with family. Like, they have guests over, the kid has their hands in their pockets, and the parent snaps at them to refrain from like such awful behavior. This over-exaggeration of like this small action that the child did would drive one into like cluster C tendencies. Now they can't be themselves and always gonna be living in their head to escape from this like criticism and perfectionism and so forth. And like, there's a chance that when in public they never felt comfortable being themselves due to one or both parents being overly critical, and that they may have constantly been corrected when interacting with relatives, guests, creating an anxiety within themselves that made them uncomfortable within their own skin. And many of these hikikomori are like avid gamers that'll spend like countless hours without ever stopping to leave their house. And like, the reason for that is escapism. And it's the same reason why like a lot of these people kind of live in their heads and have like an inner monologue going on and on and on and on and on. Yeah, while they're with like company, like, or with any social engagement, they'll always like be quiet, answer questions slowly, and then just analyze and live in their head. And people just think that's thinking, but when you're thinking like that much, it's a defense mechanism and it's escapism, and you're just trying to avoid the situation by spending less time actually in it. Because when you're only alive when you're involved in a situation, and the reason for that is escapism. And escapism is the tendency to seek distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. And this is avid through Hikikomoris. They spend a lot of time locked up in their rooms playing video games, egregious amount of video games, living these pseudo lives or living vicariously through these characters, either consciously or subconsciously. But that's what they're doing. They're escaping reality. Now, everybody has a form of escapism. Some people smoke, some people drink, some people are super social animals, some people fucking watch movies egregiously, some people jerk off a lot, some people do, like, there's people that you do everything, but no one really know. They just think that's like what they're doing. Anything that you do at a high level like that is escapism. Everybody has a form of it, but if it gets to the point where it interferes with your life, right, or you feel a dependency on it, even if it's something as small as like video games, that's not like crack cocaine, but if you're doing it compulsively, if you're jerking off like 5 times a day, try to stop, and then he's like, nah, I gotta do this shit. No, you have that's escapism. You're doing it for a reason, and unless you're in denial, like, you'll eventually see that you're doing it for a reason. Anyway, there's a highly likely possibility that these Hikikomori, when presented with stimuli that would trigger these bouts of anxiety, that they coped by diving into their inner monologue, this running tape that's in their head that keeps them comfort from the perpetual feelings of loneliness and isolation. This is not to make them sound like they hear voices of other people or whatever. They just constantly analyze every detail of everything in any social situation that they're in and run into fantasy. Now, when they're alone, they do this as well because they're so uncomfortable with themselves. All right. That's why they play so many video games. They feel these feelings of inadequacy that go back to childhood and not being good enough with the perfectionism and all that shit. Like, these elaborate fantasies will play out of how they wish their ideal lives will be, with the legitimate belief of it being true one day. But the issue is that this never comes true. They just keep hoping, but it'll never come into framework because the Hikikomori has to take action to get a result. Without any action, you're not going to change. You're just going to keep running the same routine. All right? When this doesn't come true, it really puts a fear in the Hikikomori as they age, and this causes them into like a spiraling depression because they genuinely believe that everything would be okay one day, and that day was adulthood. But once they reach adulthood and they've done everything they were told to do that would get them to when they were supposed to be on their own, they've realized that they weren't prepared to be on their own. All right? They've reached adulthood, and all those problems and issues that they've had all their lives have not been washed away now that they're of age, but they're still there, and they're kind of a child in an adult's body because they're not ready they don't have the confidence to be able to go out when of course they're able to, but they just don't realize that they're able to. Now all those problems are still there, and the one fantasy that has helped them fill them with hope all this time has been shot to hell, all right? Because the issues are at home. And what's weird is that's ironically where they stay. That doesn't make any sense. Why would one who is capable lock themselves up in the place that they've always dreamt of leaving? All right, that doesn't make any sense. And the reason for that is their upbringing. There's a chance that many of these Hikikomori were mostly isolated from their parents. The paradigm of belonging to their parents as an object from the point of infancy hasn't changed. They grow up to be groomed to represent the family, and they obey everything their parents have decreed, from what they rigorously study to what they do in their spare time. These activities conflict with the child's personal interests, but they complete them with little argument due to the fact that they exist to obey rather than to live. They live to please rather than to be. They grow up servicing another and never get comfortable within their own skin. So they've learned to be dependent. All right? To escape that skin, they dive into these forms of escapism, which resonate the ideal qualities they wish they had themselves. They'll dive into anime, vicariously living through anime characters they identify with, maybe video games, TV, like I said, beating off. They limit the amount of time they spend with themselves because they themselves are uncomfortable. Like being themselves makes them uncomfortable. So they avoid it, and they avoid trying. They avoid living, and they merely exist. Alright, social situations bring on exhausting qualities that they now have to pretend or act for however long the situation is. If they ever make a mistake in a social situation, real or imagined, they will ruminate. They'll fucking sit in their head over and over and over, analyzing, maybe days, weeks, years afterward, hoping, like, wishing they could go back to correct it, when really they're just torturing themselves. So rather than experience, they retreat, they withdraw, and they escape to these false realities. Now, I'm not trying to say if you're an anime person or a fucking video game person that you have a problem. No, I'm just saying that these people use these things as a sort of tourniquet to whatever issue they have. Alright? Now, why would 1 million parents allow their adult children to continue living with them while they contribute nothing? The answer is learned dependence. As children, hikikomori become dependent on their parents as their emotional anchor. They were never granted the independence or autonomy to do exactly what they felt like when exactly they felt like it. They always had to stay in their comfort zone, never daring to leave it out of some fear of backlash from the parent that they would experience. A hypothetical example that I can think of would be like, say the kid regularly asked to go outside of the house and go to like a friend's house or some shit, but they were constantly denied that experience, to the point that when asked by a friend to go out, the hikikomori would instinctively decline rather than endure the pain of hearing their parents deny this request without any just cause. So like the kid comes up to you, hey, you want to come to my house? The kid would immediately go, no, not really, I gotta do some one of the instinctive shutting down, because they don't want to go home, ask, and then feel that pain because they weren't denied this thing that they want. And this is emotional neglect. They grow used to this one place that was semi-safe their entire lives, which is their bedrooms. When asked to make decisions, oftentimes they would be indecisive because an anxiety has been instilled within them from this inadvertent conditioning. They don't feel comfortable answering anything that would involve expressing how they feel about something rather than themselves, such as a choice. Like they can't express choices or anything that they want because they feel as if they don't matter at the core and that they're really a piece of a bigger fucking play. Bigger like game or whatever. They just feel like a part of something. They never feel whole. They're very inadequate people. There's a good chance their parents would answer questions on their behalf when asked. Like say someone asked the kid like, what do you like? The parent would begin answering for them as if they were the ones who were asked directly. In this, the child learns that they don't need to have these social skills because someone will always do this task for them. Thus, they have learned to depend on their parents. They have a very difficult time socializing in public as adults because they never develop these skills, because they have been raised as a keychain hanging off of their parents' hip for so long. The parental figures have raised the child to believe what they themselves believe subconsciously, that their child cannot make it without their guidance. They have completed tasks for the child throughout their lives that they were very well capable of completing themselves, for the subconscious fear of abandonment. If one can succeed, they can leave. If they leave, what am I gonna do? The parents are faced with their own issues of leaving this role they've created for themselves, known as parenthood. They too will face the identity crisis if ever the child leaves. The child is the source of emotional sustenance for the parent. But what's odd about the hikikomori seems to be predominantly affecting men more than women. Why is this? The reason for this is that many of these homes, the head of the household is the mother, and the father acts as a catalyst around her. The father never takes a dominant role by making this child into a man, but by pandering to every whim of their wife. If the mother says something is okay when it isn't, the father stands by and watches. The entire dynamic revolves around the maternal figure who has the most trouble letting go of her babies. While they may complain about the hikikomori's behavior, they constantly enable the very habits they are quote-unquote wishing to correct. The paternal figure plays an active part in this by not stepping up and challenging the dynamic, but rarely will, because the paternal figure of the hikikomori are most likely conflict avoidant as well. The hikikomori was born into this Goldilocks zone that conditions for a person who avoids everything: criticism, emotional neglect, isolation, enablement, escapism, conflict avoidance, and existing as an object of his guardians. They avoid literally everything in adulthood: being an adult, society, and themselves.